It is an absolute thrill to be given this opportunity to say hello and say a few things. And for those of you who know me, you know that I am peeved to only have 20 minutes because I always love to share a lot of cool stuff. So but I'm going to take your 20 minutes happily, but say to all of you, if there's anything I say that you want to know more of, please feel free to email me or get in touch. I love chatting. Or if you're on Twitter, I'm at Regan A.R. Gurung. So when Emily and I chatted, I think, yes, Oregon State was sad that we couldn't host you this year, but it's a good, change to actually get going. And of course, a lot of my year was like this with a lot of Zoom screens that quickly became that. Thankfully, I'm happy to see many of your cameras still on, something that I didn't get to see during too much of my class time. But I wanted to think about that. And a question I get asked very often as a Center for Teaching and Learning Director is, so what do you think, what do we have to do differently for the fall? And that's how I wanted to use my remaining 17 minutes or so, is to say, hey, what's that research out there? What do we know about what happened during the pandemic? What should we be watching out for? And that's sort of what I'm going to do, because I think and I will say, I'm one of those folks who love seeing people in their, face to face, looking at somebody in their eyes. It was horrible to spend long times teaching like this. So I really want to get back to it. But I also realized during the last year, like I bet many of you did, that there were behavioral changes in our students. And that's sort of what I'm going to do in this little bit. I'm going to talk about some of the behavioral changes. I'm then going to share data, so that I collected a lot of data on what our students were doing, did a lot of research on what our students were doing during the pandemic, and I want to share that with you as to the extent that it helps us get ready to teach beyond the pandemic. And then I'm just going to end with a few quick updates from the APA, IPI, and leave you with a really nice way to connect as far as teaching psych kind of things go beyond TOPS. And again, big shout out to TOPS. Just absolutely so thrilled to see on my screen top of the deal people who I've known for ages. Amy Ramponi and I were in the same neck of the woods for 20 years before I left Green Bay. So Amy, wonderful to see you, and Gus and Maria and Stephen, just super to see you guys. I can't say that enough. So
20 years.
I know. I was just actually thinking that I've been teaching psychology for longer than many of the people on this call. So on this Zoom session. So that's a nice thought there, or scary thought right there. But behaviors, right? Let's think about behaviors. So we moved from this to this. And I actually taught, I'm going to position a lot of these comments about teaching intro psych. I taught 275 people on Zoom. And if you taught 35 people on Zoom and engagement was tough, think about 275. I had some fun memories. This is Alexander, one of my favorite students. He would log in 10 minutes before everybody else. And just so you know, he's not napping during class. This is one of the responses to COVID that I wanted to mention. I built in mindfulness and stress relief into class. And most people turned off their cameras while they did the mindfulness exercise. Alexander did not, and I did. I just thought that this so captured the pandemic that I asked his permission for me to be able to use this. But it really, notice the worn chair, notice the the ruffled bed that's right next to squeezed where he's taking his classes. And I think for me, this really makes me realize that so many of our students, like many of us, studied during the pandemic in really adverse conditions. So, cheers and salutations to all our students and to all of you who kept going. But I think that's one of those things we need to keep in mind, is that, a lot of stress going on, build in whatever stress relief you can. And I thought it'd be really interesting to share with you some actual data I collected on what people were really doing during the pandemic. This is behavior from intro psych. And I asked them, I'm really curious during this remote learning, what of these things did you do? Did you leave your chat open? Did you leave your camera on? And mind you, because I have 275 people, I cannot see all the screens of people. So I can't tell myself how many cameras are on while I'm lecturing and doing stuff and things like that. But I found this really interesting where, and all three bars here are at least half the time, always is the yellow, at least most of the time, or at least half of the time. And you'll see that as far as behaviors went, most people left their chats open. Most of the class left their chats open. A smaller percent left their cameras on. There was definitely a chunk, maybe 10% would actually log in and leave, right? And I'd never know that. I could see their square, but, some logged in and left. Many worked on other classes. Yes, not surprisingly, they were on social media. Look at the large number that had either a roommate or a family member in the room while they were taking it, right? Talk about distractions. Really big thing to keep in mind there. And for many of them, they were not stationary. They reported doing their laundry. I had a number of students, and yes, this is Oregon, but I had a number of students who took the class or were logged into class while they were on a hike. And I could tell because they turned their cameras on and I could see these scenic vistas as they answered a question, and then they turned the camera back off. So I put this screen on here because I think this is one of the things we have to think about. And here's the big point in case you miss it. During this last year, our students have gotten used to using a lot more technology, having a lot more flexibility with their technology, and for the most part have had a very different learning experience. And as we come back into face-to-face classes, and I know many of us did face-to-face for a few weeks already, but especially when we come back to the fall, we've got to remember that many students got used to these behaviors that they may still want to continue. So especially in a college class, if a faculty member now says no laptops, this is after a whole year where students completely use their laptops for everything. And that's one of the points that I wanted to make and have us keep in mind. Other things to keep in mind. Whoops, hang on. Here we go. When you look at data from around the countryside, there are two major sets of data on what students felt. And as you can see, this is over 8,000 students in this and faculty in this survey. And what you can see is keeping students engaged was the biggest concern for faculty. I think we always want to keep our students engaged, but you can see that it was the absolute top priority for faculty. And I think that's something to keep in mind. How can we keep our students engaged, especially after the pandemic? And that second point there, providing additional support. I am so glad that the pandemic has made us realize that our students need support, and especially in college and universities. And I know in high school, many high school teachers are way better at this than us college and university professors in providing support. But that was a top concern, and we've got to put some really good things into place to have that happen. Another really neat survey came out from Cengage. I put this up here because it's a really good sample from across the countryside. And the attitudes of the students, I think, are something we really need to keep in mind. Take a look at this. They asked students, what are your preferences for post-pandemic academic experiences? And notice, right, the two bars again are strongly agree and somewhat agree. This represents a major shift. Near 60% want more technology, even in their fully in-person courses. Close to 60% want to take at least some of their courses in a fully online format. More digital resources in their courses. Attitudes have changed. It's not for better or for worse, but they've changed. And all of us who teach have to be cognizant of how these attitudes towards teaching and the students' experience of what learning has changed, and be open for how do they want something, how do they want their learning experience to be. And really, what I like to say is, it's not just us going back to normal. We've got to go back to better. We've got to go back to better because we've learned about all this stuff about teaching and learning and what students want. We've got to be better at what we do to capitalize on what we've learned from the pandemic. So I think when we look at actual data from the pandemic definitely gave us a lot of lemons. We've got to make some lemonade. How do we do that? Well, here are a couple of studies that will give you a better sense of the student experience. These are all studies done in my lab. This one here, we thought, how are they using study skills, right? I mean, what are they using to study? Are they using mental images? Are they using keywords? And so on and so forth. And what you see in these bars are the correlations between these various study skills and GPA, the yellow bars, and the exam scores. And you will see it varies. For students, exam scores were highly correlated with their use of keywords, with their use of self-explanation. But something like elaboration, all of us teachers want our students to be doing, wasn't really connected to exam scores. That's the first pair. But yes, the higher GPA students were doing more elaboration. It didn't necessarily map onto their exam scores. Again, this is a teaser. I only have 20 minutes. But the point here is those usual suspects of what we think help learning, some of our smarter, higher GPA students may be doing those things more, but they may not always be translating to exam scores. And we've got to think about maybe they're not using those study techniques right. How are you and I going to do something about it, right? We know psychology, psychological science says these are the things that should work, but here's the data in front of you. They're not always showing that. How do we tweak it to make it work a little better? Something else, this was an eye-opening study for us. We did this during the first term of the pandemic. And what we found here in this study is something I think we really saw the importance of fit, and we saw the importance of self-efficacy. So you'll see some bars here. This is low and high fit on your left, low and high self-efficacy on your right. By fit, this is students who thought they do well online in an online class, that is good fit, versus students who just did not think they do well online, but were now in a remote setting. Not surprisingly, if the fit was poor, they scored less, right? Not surprisingly, self-efficacy, students who didn't think they could do it actually scored less. And right here, this is classic objective empirical data on how our students are coming into our classes with these preset notions, and those preset notions are translating into these objective differences that are actually making grade differences. What you see on your screen right here is an actual difference between the high and low in self-efficacy, high and low in fit. And again, what does this mean for you and me? This means at the beginning of class, at the start of the terms, at the start of the year, you and I have to address these preconceived notions that students have about learning, and especially after the pandemic. Let's directly tackle what they think about learning, how they think they can do, so we can help them do better. Other little things on there. This self-efficacy, we've been tracing it down a lot. I will say during the pandemic, we even found that self-efficacy was a moderator of stress and learning. This was sort of interesting too, where not just did it influence their grades, but it even influenced the relationship between how stressed they were during the pandemic and their learning. So again, just a quick nutshell here, self-efficacy, our students, and you can measure this as they come into class, before they start, they have the sense of whether they'll do well or not. We've got to try and help those students who are coming in and starting with low self-efficacy. Last few quick things in the dying minutes that I have. Synchrony is a big deal. Going back face to face is let's capitalize on it even more. Really cool study that showed whenever you could get your class to pay attention synchronously they learned more. Really funky study that showed we're actually looking at students' eyes. When students' eyes were watching a video synchronized, when they were all looking at the video in exactly the same way, their learning of test items related to that synchronized viewing was much higher. So again, let's capitalize on this synchrony. Let's get our classes. I mean, if you haven't thought too much about distractions before, now even data like this shows, let's get them to be synchronized in what they're paying attention to, because automatically the learning will be higher. I love this one right here, attention contagion. Really funky studies published again just this year that showed that if there is a student that is distracted, actually on the flip side, even really paying attention, the students next to them will even pay more attention. We've sort of known this as far as if there's somebody doodling, that's sort of distracting to the student. But in this study, they experimentally showed that using Confederates, and actually for those of you who want to talk about research methods, this is a wonderful study to use. They actually had Confederates either be distracted or paying attention. And then the research participant next to a paying attention participant scored higher on a quiz during that session. So this attention cognition contagion is really, really interesting to pay attention to. Nice experimental data that our students are so influenced by what's going on right next to them. What are the students next to them doing? Makes a big difference on their learning. And this has nicely been objectively shown. Other few quick ones. Look everywhere. Another study, interesting study coming out. Many of us, when we look out at our students, our attention is drawn to that very expressive student. And what this study showed is sometimes that very expressive student, whether really happy or actually very distressed, may not fully represent the feel of the class, but we overestimate by paying attention to just that one person. So another nice thing to keep in mind here for those of you who find yourself always looking at that one student for feedback, that one student could be deceptive. And very often, love this phenomena here, the crowd emotion amplification effect. When we go back to face-to-face, maybe we're looking at our students more. Remember the crowd emotion amplification effect. Don't overestimate the emotion of the class from the emotion of a few visible individuals, right? Really another really, really nice study over there. I have a minute, so let me wrap up with some key stuff. Sejal mentioned the APA Psych Initiative. Yes, after 3 wonderful years of work, we have put together we are done. We have recommendations out there. For college and universities, we have a brand new APA Board of Educational Affairs approved set of learning outcomes for the intro class. And this is very unique. For the first time in psychology's history, there is a set of student learning outcomes for the introductory class. And I will say, all of you who either looked at or are part of the national standards work for high school psychology, again, for the first time, that high school psychology group and the college group worked very, very closely. So most of what we did for the APA IPI is very nicely reflected in what the high school recommendations are, including the pillar model. You will also see the national standards essentially have a version of this pillar model to help with content selection in APA in psychology courses. Which is really neat to see this real nice coordination between high school and the college intro course. You can get a lot more information at the APA introductory APA IPI. Wonderful set of resources there. The learning outcomes, if you want those, some content stuff, and especially this set of material for instructors. For those of you who like talking about study guides, study skills, and like I showed you earlier with the data, we need better work on that. There is a wonderful, Stephen Chu has put together a wonderful set of slides that you can take and plug into your classrooms to help your students with study skills. So lots of really cool information there. If you want to talk, in case you're wondering, something many of us in the college and universities are thinking about is grading. Things such as specification grading, and in some cases even grading less. So again, I know I'm teasing you, but if you want to know what many of us are thinking about, that's it. How do we grade less? How can we change how we're using grading? If that intrigues you, come join the conversation. I run the Hub for Intro Psychology and Pedagogical Research, HIPPR, at Oregon State, that has tons of really cool resources that can help you in teaching the psychology course. And if you are on Facebook, I invite you to join the Hub for Intro Psych on Facebook, where we have now, even since I took this screenshot, we've now, I think, climbed past 500 members, a wonderful place to share psych take assessments and activities and things like that. So that's what I have for you. Happy teaching people. Thank you again so much for the time to chat. And I welcome any questions or comments that you have. Email me, get in touch. There's my contact information. So again, thank you.